Whoa, that was loud.
Hi, Jack. I have to say, I've had this record since 1977 when it came out. It's the original pressing.
Oh, wow, you have one in better condition than I do.
Yeah, and it's like still something that goes on my turntable fairly regularly. I'll never sell it. People have tried to buy it from me, but I refuse to sell it. So I'm a huge fan. Just wanted to get that out of the way.
Well, it's nice to meet you.
Great to meet you. I'm glad we finally got to do this. Um, Before we talk about Rock Hard 1977, I was hoping we could go back a bit. Were you actually born in LA?
Yeah, I was in what is now Scientology headquarters here. It's crazy, but it was a hospital where I think most of the kids in 1959 were born.
You,
It was a hospital called Cedars of Lebanon. It was the predecessor to Cedars-Sinai, one of the big hospitals here, and it is now Scientology brought the building. You have to excuse me. I'm recovering from COVID and pneumonia, so I apologize if I sound a little bit raspy.
we understand completely. Um, where in Los Angeles did you grow up? What part of LA?
The San Fernando Valley, Woodland Hills
Oh,
specifically,
I lived in Encino for a few years, so
or
I
as
know
we
the
used to
area.
call it, Woodland Thrills.
Well, back then the valley was a lot different than it is now, I'm
Like we
sure.
can totally do this in Valley speak if you want.
Please do.
I think it'll annoy the viewers very quickly.
Before you 75 I guess is when you joined the Runaways. Before then, what were you up to? Like were you listening to a lot of music as a teenager, and when did you start playing an instrument early on?
Oh yeah, I think I got a guitar for my birthday when I was maybe 6. I mean, really young. It was, an crappy acoustic guitar that my parents sent me down to the park to take folk lessons. But I learned chords early on and progressions and just basic stuff, and grew up listening to music because my parents were huge music fans. So we had everything from Broadway albums. When I say Broadway, I mean more like Hair, to
Right.
Tom Jones, to Creedence Clearwater Revival, kind of a bit of everything. So I grew up with a really broad music vocabulary. I think the
W-
only thing that was missing was, God, we weren't even missing jazz because my dad was a pianist, and he used to play a lot of jazz standards.
What
So
what was it what was it that caught your ear that you started to like at a young age?
I think I liked everything. That was it. It was just good music is good music. It doesn't really matter what genre it is. It doesn't matter when it was written. That's why you can take a great song and turn it into just about any style. Oh, if you heard that noise in the background, that was cats. I've also had those since I was a little kid.
I don't know if you can see that guy laying on the bed right there. That's
I
Camden, Maine, right there. His
Yeah,
back.
you're in the middle of the day, so yours has gone nice and somnolent, whereas it's still morning hunting time here. So,
Are you
but
still living in the valley now? Do you still live in LA?
no, I had to go where it was a little more musicy and move to Laurel Canyon. So I'm here with the ghosts of Jim Morrison and all the 60s hippies.
Yeah, Laurel Canyon. You mentioned acoustic guitar. So acoustic guitar was before bass.
Oh yeah, acoustic guitar was before electric guitar. Then I went back to acoustic guitar, but like a good classical guitar when I learned how to play classical, and then back to electric, and then over to bass. Come
I
on,
think
everybody knows the last person to join the band has to play bass. It's the law.
I think I read somewhere that you may have auditioned to play guitar first before you actually.
I did, but I was in a very melodic stage, and it didn't really mesh with what the Runaways were doing. Because at the time it was just Sandy and Joan, and Michael Steele, who later went on to play bass with the Bangles,
Mhm.
was the lead guitarist, the lead singer at the time. She hadn't even learned to play bass yet, and I auditioned on lead guitar and just really didn't. We just didn't hit it off musically. But um, I think Kim Fowley thought I'd be a good addition to the band, so he kept me in mind. And when they needed a bass player because Mickey left, he thought of me and he called me up and said, "Can you play bass?" I said, "I don't know. I can try." I mean, they're the same strings, right? Same
Yeah.
notes,
Uh,
kind of different function, but
it was Rodney Bingenheimer that basically introduced you to Kim Fowley.
yeah, I was out dancing at the Starwood one night, and Rodney was walking up to every teenage girl there saying, "Can you play an instrument? Can you play an instrument?" And I said, "Yeah, I can play guitar." And he said, "How old are you?" And I didn't want to tell him because I was 15. When I said 15, he said, "Oh, I got to take you and introduce you to this person. He's putting together an all-female band. You'd be perfect." And I went, "Okay, who is this weirdo?" And a friend of mine who was there with me said, "Oh, that's Rodney. He owns a club. He's fine. He's harmless." Little did anybody know. And he took me over and introduced me to the person who was helping to put together the Runaways. And I got invited to audition on lead guitar. It was, like I said, not a good match. And then this was I think that was in July or August, maybe June. And a little less than half a year later, I got a phone call asking if I could play bass.
When you first went down, you mentioned Michael Steele and Joan and Sandy. When you went back, who was there? Was Cherie Currie there at
Yeah,
that
Sheree
point?
and Lita had joined the band at that point.
And,
So
and
it was Sandy, Joan, Lita, Sheree.
was that in the? I want to. I know we got to talk about the film because I know that you're not in it and not mentioned. I'm curious why. But when you went and auditioned the second time, were they actually in a trailer like it was depicted in the film?
Yeah, it was I mean, well, it wasn't like it was depicted in the film because it was actually a more permanent trailer. So it was more like a rehearsal room. It was a very scuzzy room for sure, but it was larger than what was depicted in the movie.
Was that in the Valley?
Yeah, it was almost into Hollywood. If you go up Ventura Boulevard from, excuse me, let's try that again. If you go up Ventura Boulevard from Woodland Hills, driving toward where the Hollywood Bowl is, when you get toward the end of Ventura in North Hollywood, there is the freeway on the left, and next to the freeway, there was this little turnout. I think there might have been a building there. There might not have been. There was a lot, and then there was this semi-permanent trailer, like you would find in a trailer park, and it was set on the ground, and it had a studio in it with a horrible little PA system and a very scuzzy, well-worn sofa, nasty carpeting, a bathroom that I think was cleaned, once a year, whether it needed it or not. And that's where we rehearsed.
That sounds like North Hollywood. Was that like North Hollywood?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It
So
was it was pretty disgusting, I have to say.
how were the other members of the band? How did they treat you when you first got there? Did you connect with them immediately?
Um, they it was all business. They taught me about 10 of their songs in half an hour. I mean, it was very quick trial by fire. We ran through a quick set. It was a little bit rough, and then the manager went around the room and said, "Do you want her in the band?" And Sandy and Joan said yes. Lita said no. Cherie said yes. And then there was a discussion about whether they were going to have to cancel this gig they'd booked for New Year's Eve, which was less than a month away at that point. And the rest of the band persuaded Lita to let me in. And Lita said, "Fine, she can be in the band, whatever, who cares?"
Wow.
She was very, very Lita.
Did you become close to any of the
Yeah,
other girls?
actually became close to Lita and Cherie and to Joan and probably less close to Sandy personally, but very close to her musically because I needed to make the switch from lead guitar to bass, and it's such a different mindset as you probably know
Yeah.
because lead guitar you're playing over the instrumentation and you're filling in sound, and you're kind of just surfing on top of it. And when you're playing bass, you are creating basically the beating heart of the music. And so it's you got to work with your drummer and become a tight rhythm section. So Sandy and I would show up to rehearsal early and have our own rehearsal. And we got to where we really gelled, and I knew what she was going to do, and I could really hear what she was doing, and work with it and play into that. Sandy was a really dedicated musician and very generous with her knowledge of music.
You guys locked in good with each other.
Yeah,
Definitely.
we did. I mean, especially when you hear by the end, even by Queens of Noise, we were really tight. So I listened to what she was doing and then just fill in that groove.
So did you do the New Year's Eve gig?
Yeah, we did, and it's kind of well known what happened. I'd rather not dwell on it here. It was a rather painful experience, and I don't know that I would handle it the same way again. But for those of you who don't know, just Google it.
Yeah, we don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go.
Yeah, let's not.
Um, this is kind of a painful question, but I have to ask it
Everything's
to you.
painful when, excuse me. This has been, I got sick 3 weeks ago with COVID,
It's
turned into
horrible.
pneumonia, turned into pneumonia, and this is the most sick I've ever been.
Sorry. I'm glad you're getting better
Yeah,
anyway.
it's slow. It's going to be a long process.
Um, you weren't allowed to play on the debut record. Can you like just elaborate on that a little bit? Because I don't
Yeah,
really understand.
the manager who was producing the record had just raped me, and he knew he'd crossed the line. He didn't want to be looking at me every day, and being reminded of that and feeling guilty about that and wondering what I was going to do. So he just kept me out of the studio. Let's be clear about that. There's no other reason. Whatever has been said, whatever excuses were made at the time, that's the true reason.
Okay, I was unaware that that incident happened that early on. I didn't
Oh
know.
yeah, it was a month after I joined, less than a month after I joined the band. It was 11 days after I turned 16. And we went right into the studio after that. Um, and he didn't want me there, understandably, from his perspective.
How did you move forward after that?
I stuck this in a mental box in a closet, put up, crime scene, do not disturb tape, and tried not to think about it.
I'm going to try and move away from it,
Yeah,
actually.
let's.
Um, Queens of Noise, as I showed you the record, is one of my favorite records from the 70s. I've had that copied since it came out. What's your recollection of making the record?
Now, that record was us because our manager was not in the studio for it. We went in with Earl Mankey, who had produced the Beach Boys, and he produced that record. We ran a little roughshod over him, I will say. It was kind of a crazy recording session. I'm surprised we got as much studio time as we did. But Earl wanted to make that record with us. And um, boy, we used every technique in the book. A lot of it was us playing together as a band, and some of it was laid down one instrument at a time. Um, let's see, I think Cherie got pneumonia in the middle of that, making that record. Um, Actually, I might have gotten pneumonia in the middle making that record. A lot of us got sick. There was some definite partying going on in the studio. I won't name names, but a lot of people came down to hang out. So it was kind of a mishmash. Some of it was written, some of the songs were written in the studio. I see movement behind you.
Yeah, that's Cam.
This,
He likes to get involved in the in the podcast as much as he
I'm just
can.
always reminded of Ghostbusters. It's like the sponge migrated.
So, the record does say that Kim co-produced it with Earl, but you're saying he pretty much was not
He had
around.
very, very little to do with it. He was there. He would stop by occasionally. Maybe, take some songs that he liked, rewrite them to get his name on them. Um, He wouldn't let us, like, I had found the song I Love Rock and Roll while we were in England, and I wanted to record it on that album. Kim kept telling us that the record had arrived from England broken. And so Joan and I championed doing that song. But Kim wouldn't have owned any publishing. So he wanted us to do songs that he had written or that other artist of his had written. And
And you
that is
guys were
what we
so,
did.
yeah, you guys were so young. It must have been really hard to try and deal with an older person like that who was running the show.
Well, we really had no agency. And we had somebody who was telling us, look, everything you have, everything you are, you owe to me. You need to have allegiance to me. And we were teenagers. There was not really anywhere else for us to go if we wanted to be in a band. Because we were kind of we weren't the first all female band, but we were certainly the first all female teenage band to have any success. And we really weren't welcomed into bands that we had played with growing up. There had been a group of guys that I jammed with on a regular basis. But when it came to being in a band, they wanted, the serious musicians.
You got a writing credit on Neon Angels on the Road to Ruin. Do you remember how that song got written and who's and what your part of it was?
Yeah, Lita had the opening riff and then didn't know what to do with the song. There was and I kind of said, just hold the E chord and do this rhythm. And that was how that song came together. It was just Lita having this riff and me putting the glue in it and writing the chorus. And
Great
then,
song.
it's actually one of my least favorite songs on that record.
Real, oh, it's the one you got a writing credit. I think you might have more than one writing credit, but I
Yeah,
know
I
you did.
do. There's Hollywood and Heartbeat. I mean,
Right.
Heartbeat was a song that I had written, brought in. It was a mock love song to Joey Ramone, and it was a song called Joey. And we went in and recorded the track, which was very good. And then one of these days, when Cherie and Kim showed up before I did, and they decided they were going to rewrite it as a song for Cherie to sing to David Bowie. And even though it's all my music, suddenly I got reduced from 100% of the song, not down to 50%, but down to 20%, because Earl and Kim and Cherie and I think, I don't remember, Joan or Lita took writing credit on it. And they decided they were going to just split it up equally. And I had no say in that. I didn't even know that I could say, no, you can't rewrite my song. I don't give you permission.
It sounds
I
like
didn't
you
know
were
anything.
sounds like you were kind of low on the totem pole as far as the hierarchy of the band goes at that time because you're the newest member and you're having a problem with the manager and
Yeah, I mean, but he treated everybody that way at one time or another. I mean, he was better to Joan and Sandy mostly because I think he was never sexually attracted to them. And kind of the same with Lita. He didn't like tough girls. He wanted to destroy innocence. There is a story that somebody else involved with the band in the early days tells about the band going out to dinner and walking into this restaurant where some girl was celebrating, I think, her 18th birthday, a very young birthday. And she was really excited and was like, standing on the chairs, dancing and having a great time. And apparently, Kim said, somebody needs to blank her and take her down a peg. He did not like happy young girls.
that sounds
And
difficult.
he surrounded himself with some very hard women who didn't have a problem with him, but nice girls did.
Um, you went
Let's go
on
back to the
tour.
music, Steve.
You, I've been in the music business my whole life, but your story is really hard to. It's just hard for me to like stay completely keep my focus because it's the way you're presenting it. It sounds pretty rough, and I believe that it was. Um, you went on tour, the club tour. Now I know a lot of people that were at the show in Boston at the Rat, and it's one of the most legendary shows ever because Iggy Pop and David Bowie came to the show to see you guys. Do you remember anything about that or that tour or that show or any of that?
I remember that show very well because we did a couple of shows at the Rat, but that night it was an extremely hot East Coast night, like really hot, and we blew out the power a couple of times. So we blew out the power and we went back to our early days of the band when we had to do 4 sets a night and we didn't have enough material. And we would hold screaming or yelling contests between the boys and the girls in the audience. So we did that while the power was out. Because we had the PA for a while and then the PA went out. And then they finally got the power back on, but there wasn't enough power to power the sound system and the AC, so they just left the AC off. And I think it must have been close to 100 degrees on that stage. And I had been wearing for that gig, I had been wearing this beautiful sequined tank top that was part of a sweater set that had belonged to my grandmother. And it got, I mean, this was like cashmere with, with sequins on it. And it was so hot. I just, when we came out for the encores, I said, the hell with it. And I just took the shirt off and played in my bra. And, um, and I think we had just been told that Iggy and Bowie were there. And Cherie was not happy when I did that because she was about to dedicate Heartbeat to David Bowie, which he did. And then I'm like just whipping my shirt off. Um, yeah, we had a fight about that later, and it turned out I found out years later that that in fact Bowie and Iggy had been to that show, but they had left well before that.
Oh, so
So
you didn't,
we fought about nothing.
so you guys didn't get to hang out with them.
No,
Wow. Thunder Train, I know Mark Bell, he went on to be the singer of Joe Perry Project. They opened or played with you. It was 2 days, two shows, 2 days in a row,
I think there
right?
was maybe we did it. We There was a band called the Beams that I don't know if they just came and gave us their shirts or whether they played one of those gigs with us.
The
That
Rat
I
is
don't remember.
the Rat's like gone, long gone, but it's one of the most legendary clubs in America, really. And just the fact that you guys played there and that happened, it's a story that's been told a million times by a million people. Um, what was the rest of that tour like? Because it seems like it might have been a rough time.
Well, I mean, touring it was both wonderful and occasionally difficult. It was wonderful because we were out there together and it was us against the world, trying to conquer the world, which was, when you're 16 and you've spent most of your life in the San Fernando Valley, getting to see the U.S. is and parts of the world it's pretty incredible. And we got to play a lot of legendary clubs. We played CBGB several times, and those gigs were memorable because they were insanely packed, with lines around the block in the neighborhood. And then you had David Johansen standing on the jukebox and Rick Derringer sitting on the side of the stage, and the Ramones coming to sound check and Blondie coming to sound check. And I
Wow.
remember during one of the sound checks, I was trying to get Dee Dee Ramone to trade shirts with me. Only Dee Dee didn't want to take his shirt off in front of me. So he was going to do it, and then I think the rest of the Runaways showed up, and Dee Dee got shy. It's hard to think of any of the Ramones as shy, but Dee Dee was
Wow.
shy about that.
Were you starstruck by all these people?
No, I grew up. My parents knew celebrities, and so I had grown up around them. And I think the only time I've ever been starstruck in my life was when I was working for a film studio, and I was the lawyer on a big motion picture, and I was having a meeting with the line producer, and I went out to go get my car from the valet, and I forgot that I had to pay first. And right as I started to turn around, all of a sudden there were all these people that started breaking into applause. And I turned back around. I went, I don't think they're applauding for me. And when I turned back around to go back toward the hotel, I saw Mikhail Gorbachev there with his wife,
Wow.
right? And it was right after he had opened up the Soviet Union. And I just went, oh my God, here is somebody who just changed the lives of millions of people. And I just went, was just, absolutely dumbstruck.
Wow. That's pretty heavy.
So I didn't get to meet him, but it's the only time that I've ever been around somebody really famous that I was just like, whoa.
The rock stars don't compare.
Now,
Uh,
actually, I'm going to tell you, there's one that compared because I was out eating a late lunch one Sunday about 3 p.m. at a restaurant in West Hollywood that I frequent. And I was sitting in a booth with a friend, and that booth kind of faced the door. And I looked up from my meal, and all of a sudden in the doorway, there is Stevie Wonder and his entire extended family, like dressed for church, Sunday best, the whole family. And I just, it was the same thing, or I just stopped speaking in the middle of my sentence and kind of looked in awe. And you could hear that hush kind of spread out across the restaurant as other people realized. And all of a sudden, there was everybody in the restaurant looking at Stevie Wonder and his family absolutely in silence. And then we just started applauding. I mean, you couldn't help it.
wow.
It's like Stevie Wonder fills a room.
Did your parent, what did you, how did your parents feel about you going on the road and being a teenager?
I mean, this was the mid 70s. We had a generation of parents that had grown up in the shadow of World War II, where they were very protected. And I think they wanted to be a different kind of parent. And some of it was that they didn't really get to have their full childhood. So my parents were really young when they had me. I mean, my mother was 19. My dad was 22. And so they were kind of living their own life, and they knew how determined I was to be in a band. And I think all our parents understood that if they tried to lay down the law, it was not going to be successful. And they wanted to keep a relationship with their teenage daughters. So they said, okay. And there were a lot of representations made to them about how we were going to be cared for, and none of which happened.
Did they have to meet Kim Foley?
They did, but like anybody who is a psychopathic narcissist, he was able to talk a good game. Psychopaths know how to manipulate people, and our parents were not immune to that. And unfortunately, when it came time to get us a lawyer, and I was pushing very hard to get, somebody who was an entertainment attorney. And the drummer's mother said, "No, hire so and so. He's a family friend. He'll, you can trust him. He'll look after the girls." This guy was a blowhard who did not know what he was doing, and he eventually got disbarred. Um, and he let us give away 100% of our publishing, 95% of our merchandising, not that we ever got the other 5%. So we had a terrible deal that was rubber stamped by a court. And then there was nobody independent on tour with us.
So you didn't get anything from your songs at all as far as publishing goes?
I only got the writer's share, what was credited to me. And even the publishing company purported not to be able to find me for about 20 years. Well, I was very active on social media and living in an address that was a matter of public record. So they held on to the publishing royalties for 20 years until
It's
I
really,
finally realized that we had probably recouped our minuscule advance and tracked them down. And they were, "Oh, you're one of our lost artists." It's like, how did you lose me?
yeah, they got the songwriting credits wrong on the back of the album too. I'm sure you're aware of that. If you go on Wikipedia, they're listed differently than they are on the album. I believe it or not, I believe Wikipedia more than I believe this from what you're telling me about the way the organization was run. Uh, It's crazy. Now, when you did the American tour and you went back, was there any time in between Japan? Because that's when it seems like the Runaways really blew up, is when you guys went to
So
Japan.
we did a tour of the US, a tour of the UK, which was supposed to include Europe, but that blew up over there. And we did another US tour, and then we did Japan. And Japan was the last tour that we did with Cherie and me with the band.
That was a disaster, wasn't it, in terms of how everyone was getting along?
Yeah. So unbeknownst to us, we had done some photos for magazines in Japan. And without anybody telling us, Kim had arranged for a separate photo shoot with Cherie. And the images that the photographer took were, I mean, they were basically kiddie porn. She was dressed, but minimally, and none of us knew about them until we got to Japan. And Japan I mean, Japan started out wonderful. It was the first place we'd ever been where we didn't have to share hotel rooms, which is just like, oh my God, a bathroom to myself where I don't have to wait for Lita to put on all her makeup, you know? So that was really nice. And when we walked in, the Japanese record company had thoughtfully given each of us a copy of the magazines that had us in it. And we found this special tour book devoted to the band. And the first half of it was these erotic pictures of Cherie, and this was not how we wanted to be portrayed as a band. I mean, there was a lot of tension to begin with about Cherie's outfit during Cherry Bomb, with most of the band not liking it, but wanting to give Cherie agency over what she wore on stage the same way we wanted it. And we were so mad at her for this because we didn't realize she hadn't arranged it. And we didn't speak to her for the first few days of the tour. I mean, we just went completely silent on her.
That must have been difficult. Now, you guys weren't even, you're barely 18 by this point, right? When you're in Japan. If
Yeah, I think Lita was 18. Sandy might have been 17, and Joan Cherie and me were 16. Or maybe it was, no, I guess, I don't know. Cherie and I were just, I think we had turned 17 by that point. Yeah, 1977, I was 17.
now I can't tell if you really like the leader at that point or it's tongue in cheek the way you're talking about the
No,
situation.
I stayed friendly with Lita, even though I got in a lot of fights with her, but that would be which had to do with Lita's nature, because Lita had a very short fuse. So, she knew it. You just kind of went, okay, I'm just gonna keep my distance until that blows over. It really only ever got bad with Lita once. I think this is a well-known incident. Lita stayed out partying all night and came back at like 6 in the morning, got into bed, and I just stayed. I woke up at a kind of normal time to wake up, and just stayed there in bed in the dark until noon. At which point, I had to call a mutual friend of Lita and me, and I just turned a light on, dialed the phone, and talked very quickly because you really had to have an appointment to talk to people because hotel phone calls were so expensive and we weren't really given per diems. So it's like you had to know if you were calling somebody who worked at a record company that they were going to be there because that phone was going to get answered and you were going to pay for that call. So I did that, and Lita woke up and said, "Turn off the light." And I went, "Okay, but Lita, I'm calling Kenny, our friend." She said, "I don't care. Turn it off." And she picked up the phone, hit me over the head with it, and tried to strangle me with the cord. So I just threw all my stuff in a suitcase, everything, and went down and sat in the lobby for like 5 hours until the band got its act together to leave to drive on to the next town.
So this
We're
was
fine.
on one, was this on that second US tour that you did?
I think it was the second tour. It was somewhere in Texas.
Wow. Um, and she was the one that you felt you connected the most with in the band?
Yeah.
I can hardly wait to hear why you decided to finally say you had enough. It was it during the Japanese tour or was it when you got home?
Well, it was actually at the end of our second US tour, I had decided that I was going to leave the band because it was very clear that there was nobody looking out for us. And I had spent my money to fly to New York to try to get Kiss's manager to manage us, and Jack Douglas, who was Aerosmith's record producer, to produce
Yeah.
us. Now, he had said he would executive produce our next record with one of his proteges, a guy named Eddie Leonetti, um, to who did some records you might have known about. I think he had just produced a record by a band called Artful Dodger,
Yeah.
and they agreed to produce us. Bill Aucoin said he would manage us if we got rid of Kim. And I went back and presented all this to the band, and the band was doing a lot of substances at that point. And they were just kind of whatever, not really interested in doing anything to advance their own career. And I decided I wanted to leave. And I told this to Joan, who I was sharing a room with toward the end of our second tour. And she, we were in the bathroom, and she just, like, I was sitting on the closed toilet, and she came down and she actually knelt in front of me and started crying and begged me not to leave the band. So, against my better judgment, I stayed in the band for our Japanese tour. Um, but in the middle of our Japanese tour, my bass broke, and it was an extremely rare bass. Even then, it was a 1965 Gibson Thunderbird with an original white finish,
Wow.
two pickup reverse design. I mean, they only made a few hundred of these that year. So it's like now, if you could even find one, it would cost you about $35,000. They're that rare. And I had asked our booking agent to make sure our instruments were insured before we went there. Apparently, that had not been done.
How did I know
And
you were going to say that?
yeah, just because that's what happens. But when you're a teenage girl, you don't know this, right? You don't know how to do this yourself. Nobody ever taught me how to get insurance or do any of that. And there was they had given me just a guitar stand, not a bass stand, and a very wobbly one at that. And I had pointed it out during our sound check, and they said, "Oh yeah, okay, we'll get you a sturdier one." And we went and did the gig. And at the end of the show, walking off stage, put my bass in this guitar stand, which is still there. Walked off, didn't think anything about it. Come back to do our encores, and they hand me a backup bass. And I said, which wasn't mine, it wasn't even my backup bass because I hadn't brought my own backup bass. And they said, "Oh, yours is out of tune." And it's kind of like, well, why didn't you tune it? But I finished the encores with this backup bass, and then like had the feeling on the whole trip back to the hotel that the band wouldn't look at me, wouldn't meet my eyes, that they were, when I wasn't paying attention to them as we were walking into the hotel, that they were talking about me. Like, you get that sense. And I was kind of sitting in my hotel room freaking out, like, what's going on? And about half an hour later, there's a knock on the door, and our one roadie that we had brought over with us um, told me that my bass had fallen over and broken, and I just
Oh,
lost my shit. And I realized nobody cares about us. There's nothing going on, and I was just angry. And I'd had some room service dinner there, and I had a bottle of Coke, and I was so pissed off at the band for just avoiding the issue, not telling me, for making this kind of jerk of a roadie tell me. And so I picked up the Coke bottle and I threw it at the wall, and it smashed into a million pieces. And then that kind of took care of my immediate anger. Um, but then it kind of built back up again. And I was pissed off at myself because I hadn't quit, because I was still there. And I remembered at the time that I think it was the bass player for the Bay City Rollers of all bands had just left, and the Bay City Rollers were huge. And I thought, this guy is leaving this huge band. Why can't I do this? and my anger turned inward. And there was this huge piece of broken glass just sitting on the floor. And I was so pissed off at myself at that point. I just picked up this glass and I just slashed at the upper part of my arm. I mean, I wasn't trying to hurt myself. I was just mad. And I ended up um, opening a fairly big cut on the inside of my elbow. And about and sort of that really took care of my immediate anger. And then I kind of looked down and I went, oh, I should probably do something about this cut. And I went into the bathroom and got a washcloth and was putting pressure on it. And at that point, there was another knock on the door. And I went and opened the door. It was Cherie. And the hotel room was pretty covered in blood at that point. And Cherie just called down and said, we need to get Jackie to a hospital. And she's like, Cherie, when Cherie tells this story, she says, I don't know how I got that broken glass out of her hand. And the answer is, you don't know, Cherie, because I'd already dropped it. I was already cleaning up the mess and putting pressure on the wound. But she did get them to take me to a hospital. And when they were bandaging me up, she was trying to get them to do stitches, and they didn't speak any English. That wasn't working. And then she was trying to mime putting a butterfly bandage on it to at least keep this wound closed, which didn't translate. And so they just gave me a sedative, slapped a bandage on, made sure the bleeding had stopped, and sent me on my merry way. So to this day, I have a scar.
So you actually did need stitches and they didn't give you stitches?
I probably was fine without stitches, but I did need a bandage that was going to hold the edges of that wound together. I mean, it ended up healing, but I had a very prominent scar for quite some time.
And this was the end of the tour, the very end.
Yeah, it was. We had already done all our regular gigs. We were supposed to play the Tokyo Music Festival. So I ended up leaving before we did that because when we got back to the hotel, I mean, I did a few more TV appearances with the band. And then I felt that same sense of anger starting to well up in me a few nights later. And I just picked up the phone, called my mother, and I said, get me out of here.
What happened after that? Did anyone contact you and try and keep you in the band? Like,
No, they left me a bus ticket to the airport in Tokyo.
wow.
And I got to the airport and I had gotten so many gifts from fans that I owed an export duty. And they wanted a certain amount of money from me, and I had no money on me. I mean, I had none. I just started crying, and they went off. They had a big conference, and then they came back and they said, "Okay, you big rock star, we let you go."
Wow.
I mean, they were so nice in Japan. Of course, I got to the U.S., I declared everything, and customs wasn't quite as nice. So they held on to all my luggage until I came up with the money. And fortunately, my father's wife at the time worked at the air, like in the area of the airport. She worked for one of the airlines, and she came and bailed me out and took me home. And I still will remember because this is indelible. Sitting there waiting for her, sitting on a staircase at the airport, and there was a guy sitting next to me rocking back and forth going, TWA, TWA, did you see the big planes? TWA, 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 did you see the big planes? TWA. I was just did that for an hour.
Wow. So what happened after that? You got home and did you just, was it
That was
complete?
it.
No one
I
ever
didn't go.
contacted you ever.
No.
So did you try to do music? I mean, far as
Well,
I knew,
I did eventually get contacted because our manager wanted because he had my bass. And it
Kim,
was like, yeah. I mean, I try, here's what I believe about people who are notorious sex abusers. They deserve for their name to die. Because the worst thing you can do from their perspective is forget about them. So that's why I try very much not to mention names because
I'm
he
sorry.
deserves to
I'm
have his name
sorry I'm bringing
forgotten.
the name up. You know,
I'm just letting you know. It's like that's the worst thing you can do is don't talk about them. Let them be forgotten.
we don't need to talk about them anymore. In night,
No,
so did
the history of the band belongs to the band The Runaways.
Yeah, and it's quite a legacy that the band has. Because I was going to mention that in a second, but first, when you got back, did you, far as I know, were you in any? Did you play at all again?
Yeah,
So were
I
you in
actually
other
did.
bands?
I did some solo stuff. I recorded a number of demos. I kept plugging away at it, but I was also working behind the scenes at this point, and I was definitely more comfortable behind the scenes. So I ended up having a pretty decent career in music as a record promo person and a music publisher. And I realized that if I really wanted to get taken seriously and get to where I wanted to in the industry, I needed to go back and get a college degree. So that's what I did. I went, I completed my first year of college through UCLA Extension and through some local college credits. And I transferred to UCLA, got a degree in linguistics and Italian with a specialization in computing. And when I graduated, it came time to decide, was I going to go on and get a PhD? Was I going to go to work? What was I going to do? And I really loved linguistics and was going to get a PhD, had scholarships and fellowships to take me all the way through, but realized how hard it was to find a job in the city that you wanted to live in. And so I thought, just for the hell of it, I'll go take the LSAT and think about going to law school. And then I don't have to be a lawyer. I can kind of do whatever I want. Um, and I ended up doing that, got into Harvard Law School,
This is going to be
went
one
to
of my
Harvard,
favorite parts right now. Keep going.
I went to Harvard and discovered that when you graduate law school, your law school loans are so huge, you pretty much have to be a lawyer to pay them back. Um, but yeah, so yeah, I got my degree from Harvard, and I know what you're going to say next.
I'm
You're
going
going to
to
point
ask about
out
your
that
classmate, right?
my classmate Barack Obama, yes, he was in all of my first year classes except our one small session, and yeah, we were probably the two best known people in our class for completely different reasons. He was a very serious student, very smart.
Did you get to know him at all
Um,
and hang out at all, or?
we weren't really in the same group of friends, but I
Mhm.
mean, of course, I got to know him because we were the two most talkative people in class. So, I am sure if you mention my name to him, he knows who I am.
Did you live on campus or did you live in the Cambridge area?
I lived mostly in the Cambridge area. My last year, because I was going to take a year off to do a year of study in Italy, and I went there. I ended up getting very ill and having to come back. And I had missed the first 2 weeks of the quarter, so Harvard wouldn't let me start right away. But so at that point, I came back to LA to wait for the next semester, and I did manage to win the housing lottery for the good on campus dorm, um, where I had like my own suite of rooms, and it was more than one room. Didn't have a bathroom. I had to go up to the next floor to do that. But
You
yeah, it
know,
was right opposite the faculty offices.
well, after I got done working for labels for a long time, I worked at Harvard actually for 5 years while I was managing bands, up and coming bands. And I was at Seven Divinity. I worked in the molecular cellular biology program as an assistant. So I got to hang out at Harvard for a few years. Interesting place for sure.
The law school, I mean, maybe they've improved it since I went there, but it was like I didn't even think about it. It's the law school is a dump. And then I had just a doctor appointment on campus, which you had to walk across the river down to the south part of the
Yeah.
campus where the business school is. And you see the business school and it's bright and cheery and sunny and beautiful. And it's like, why is the business school so much nicer than the law school? And people said, because the graduates of the business school donate a ton of money to the school. Lawyers don't.
Boy, a lot of famous people have been in the Harvard Law School too. That's pretty
A
incredible.
lot. Yeah.
Um, One thing that I skipped that happened before, a couple things actually. First, you were on the dating game. Is that true?
Yeah, that was true. I had a roommate when I was 18 years old who worked for Chuck Barris Productions, which produced The Dating Game and and ultimately The Gong Show and some other fun stuff. And she had a quota of people that she needed to get in as possible contestants. And 1 week she hadn't made it, and she's just like, "Please, please, can you just go down tomorrow? I just need to make my quota." She's like, "You don't have to go on the show. Just show up and go through the audition process." And I said, "Okay." And I wasn't taking it seriously. So when they put us up for a little mock game, I just started mouthing off, just for having fun. And of course, the instant I jumped off the stage, they ran up and they said, "We're putting you on the show. We love you."
Wow.
And I went, "Okay, well, why not? This sounds like a lark." So yeah, so I was on the dating game. And the fun part of that was that there were, they did 2 shows per show, or 2, little dates. The second girl on the program had as one of her 3 bachelors Pee Wee Herman in one of his earliest television appearances.
Wow.
He was hilarious. So the guy that I picked and I are standing backstage watching this, and we were like, "She's got to pick him. He is the funniest thing in the world," and she did. And unfortunately, that episode no longer survives. Some fan of mine recorded my half of the episode. It exists on the internet. But I have had people at Game Show Network, which inherited all of those tapes, go through the archives, and that show does not exist anymore. So
But we could find your episode on YouTube?
you can find my half of it, but you can't find Pee Wee's half of it.
Huh. Okay.
He was on again later.
Yeah. I think
Or
I remember seeing something with him on there one time. So he was on more than
yeah,
once.
yeah, he was on more than once. It was it if you were a member of SAG, you got paid for being on the dating game. The rest of us didn't. We just got a date, and I supposedly won a Norma Kamali bikini, which I was very into getting, and I never got.
How was the date?
Um, the guy ended up not going, so I got to take a friend of mine, which was fine.
Oh,
But it was a what used to would now be called a spa, at the time was euphemistically called a fat farm. And so it was me and a friend of mine who made me look heavy. And it was like 800 calories a day. This poor chaperone just said, I'm taking you guys out to dinner. You two are not right for this place." And of course, I had to share a room with the chaperone, which I wasn't too thrilled about. I missed the days of the great trip to Rome or Paris or Budapest or wherever. I got
um,
Palm Springs. Whoop de doo.
couple more things about the Runaways. In 1994, you had a semi-reunion show with Sandy and Cherie. Why wasn't it a full-on reunion?
Well, it wasn't really meant to be a reunion. It was Cherie was playing some dates at a local club called the Coconut Teaser,
Oh yeah.
and she asked Sandy and me to do a few songs with her, and we agreed. So we actually did, and we did a set also up at a club in San Francisco called Slim's. So I think we just did 4 songs, maybe 6, and we had a great time.
Has anyone ever tried to get a legitimate Runaways Queens of Noise era show together? Ever?
I mean, I think around that point we did try, and Joan was becoming fairly big at that point, and Lita was Lita. So it never happened. And then they've tried to do it since, but without me involved. Um, it's fine.
Hmm.
Whatever they want
Um,
to do.
okay, I got to talk to you about the film because it'll be the last Runaways thing. You asked not to be it, from what I've read, you asked that your name not be used in the film. Is that true, and why?
All right, look, here's the accuracy. I was living in London at the time. I got a call from a lawyer that I had done a lot of business with and knew well, saying, "Hey, there's this producer, Art Linson, is putting together a film about the Runaways. We'd like to option your life story rights. Here's the offer." And I said, "Okay, well, what are Joan and her manager, Kenny Laguna, getting?" And he said, "Oh, I can't tell you that, but everybody's most favored nations for their life story rights." Now, to put this in perspective, you have to understand that at this point, I had a law degree. I
Yeah.
was a film attorney. I'd been a film attorney for some time, quite a respected one. Like I said, done a lot of deals with this particular lawyer. And I know that there's a fiction that says everybody's going to get paid exactly the same for their life story rights. But then I know, I know that I know, and we can do all the iterations of that. That this just means that you are going to pay a consulting fee or a producer fee to Joan and to Kenny, and Joan's going to make a lot more money than the rest of us. And I'm like, okay with that. She's a bigger star. But I need to know, am I getting 10% of what she's getting? Am I getting 25% of what she's getting? I can't evaluate this offer without that info. So I said again, okay, got it. How much are Joan and Kenny making? And he repeated everybody's most favored nations for their life story rights. And it was like, Larry, I know what the hell this means. What are they getting? He said, oh, I can't tell you that. I said, okay, I cannot give you my rights then. I said, you come back to me when you have a script. Let me see the script, and I won't be a jerk about it for the sake of being a jerk, but you're giving me no info and I'm not ready to sign on. Thanks. And they did. And eventually, of course, I waited for them to come back to me with a script because I knew one was out there. And after, a month went by and they didn't do it, I got somebody that I used to work with to get a copy of the script for me. And I looked at it and there was some stuff in there that I would not have done. And I called them up and I said, look, I got a problem with some of this. Um, I'm still not saying no to you, but you, you need to give me the info that I asked for and take these three things out of the script. And they weren't anything that was particularly important to the story. It's not like it was going to be a big deal. So they ended up taking the things out. I actually brought Lita to them, who was more important as written in the script. And we eventually agreed to do this for the amount that they had offered in the first place with some, Lita wanted something changed in the script. And they dragged out the negotiations long enough to be able to get the film insured, started it without us, and then said, don't think we can make a deal. And they
Wow.
just took the chance with Lita with using her name, and then they were more afraid of me. So they created a so-called composite character, but it really wasn't because I was in the band pretty much the exact same time as Sheree was.
It was that was really a bummer. I was bummed out about that. I'm like, where's Jackie Fox in this film? I couldn't believe it. It was an entertaining film. I mean, I enjoyed it and I'm glad that the band got the recognition, but it wasn't the whole story, you know?
Well, nobody could remember the story was the problem. So it was the highlights as written in magazine articles. Floria Sigismondi, who is a really, really nice lady, directed it. And she had never directed anything long form before. She had come out of the music video world. And she wasn't really given a lot of support. And I actually had a long talk with the producer and kind of filled in a lot of the blanks in the story for him because I never wanted to be a jerk for the sake of being a jerk. I just wanted to be treated fairly. And ultimately, these were people that could not do that.
So you
So
never were like Joan or Kenny Laguna or anyone never contacted you because they seem to have a lot to do with the film. They never asked you to sign
no,
on.
last time I talked to Joan was when Vicky was working on her documentary Edge Play, and Vicky had somehow gotten Joan's phone number. And we called Joan up together, and Joan just started screaming at us. And that was the last time I ever talked to Joan. I think, Joan's manager is not a good guy. He's wants to preserve her legacy, cares about the band's legacy only to the extent that it's not going to reflect badly on Joan, and is somebody the rest of us would like to stay away from. So, will there ever be a Runaways reunion? I don't think so. Not, I am. Hey, if it is, I'm not going to be part of it. So
Well, I'm sad to hear that, but I understand why. As a
I don't trouble my pretty little head about it.
yeah,
I've got other things going on, and we can talk about the game a little bit now
yeah, I
because
definitely want to, but I want to say that I feel that your role and your part in the band is really important, and I respect and love what you did with the Runaways. So,
oh, thank you.
yeah, because you were,
I'm not worried about the importance of my role in the band. I'm, still still there being the glue that kind of holds some of the band's legacy together. Not because I'm the most famous person or the person that is the most important in the band's history, but because I'm the one that still really thinks of it with love and with a great deal of love for the band's fans.
that's good to hear. Okay, I know I just put you through all that. Uh, so you have a talk about Rock Hard 1977 and tell us all about it because I want to hear, and I'm sure the listeners want to hear as well.
So I am an avid gamer. I'm kind of all kinds of games, but in particular board games. I love the ability to use my brain and either cooperate with people or compete against people while it's kind of solving puzzly things and immersing myself in another world, and particularly a completely analog world that gets me off of my screens for a while and gets me face to face with people. And one of the things I love about the board gaming world is that there are all kinds of people in it. And when you sit down at a game table to play with somebody, you don't have any gatekeeping going on. So I sit down to play a game with you. I don't care who you're voting for in this election. I don't care, what your whatever your form of address is. I'm going to do my best to respect it. I'm not going to ask for proof of whether you're a doctor or not or any of that. You want to be Dr. Riccardo? I'm going to call you Dr. Riccardo because hey,
That's a first.
I don't yeah, but I mean, I would do that because it would be respectful. And all I want to know is, do you play this kind of game? And do you have an hour and a half or 2 hours or 3 hours, or, if you're playing Twilight Imperium all day to play this game? Um, and then when we're playing it, are you nice? That's all I care about. And it's just this wonderful way to interact with people. And there are games for every taste. So I've been doing this for maybe, I don't know, 12 years. And about 5.5 years ago, I had my whole game group, which consisted of 5 people, all show up at the same time. Usually it would be 4 of us. And that was fine because the games we like to play really well with 4 people. But there weren't a lot of 5-person games, especially 5-person strategy games. And I looked and I was like, why? I've got over 100 games, and there, there are none that really accommodate 5 people without having so much time in between, your turn and the next one that you want to pull out your phone, where you're invested in what other people are doing, where it's thinky and puzzly, but at the same time, there's that fun factor from, the games that I loved when I was a kid. It's like, why doesn't this exist? I know I'm going to design one. This is like famous last words. If I had known, I don't know that I would have decided to do this because it is so much work. It's an unbelievable labor of love. And it kind of came to me. A lot of people had been saying, you need to write a memoir. You should write a memoir. And I don't ever want to write a memoir because it would hurt a lot of people just to tell the truth about what happened. And I'd have to dwell in this, the place of all these unhappy memories. And I
Hmm.
decided that I really want to focus on the fun part of being in a band because it was a hell of a lot of fun. And I got along with everybody in the band most of the time. And in recent years, we've found ourselves dwelling on the differences rather than the fun stuff. It's like there's crazy stuff that happened to me and to my friends in the music industry. Let me make a game about trying to make it big in the music industry back in the classic days of sex and drugs and rock and roll when everything was really fun. The pre cancel culture. I'll use the term loosely because there are a lot of things that deserve to be canceled in pop culture. Um, but, a sense where anything was possible. And the music industry lends itself so well to a particular style of basically a European style game where you're taking a worker, in this case you, and you're choosing among certain actions and things that you can do. And you're trying to get your musical chops to improve. You're trying to improve your reputation, to write some original songs, maybe to get a record deal and have some royalty income so you can quit your day job. Because in my game, you start with a day job to pay for your rehearsal studio and your
Yeah.
publicist and all your people and your crew. And you need more and more crew to play bigger and bigger gigs, and you need your stats to be up. So it's trying to do all these things, to record a demo tape, to figure out when to blow off work. Maybe if you want some extra actions, to consume a little candy, but not too much because there's some negative consequences to that. And all in the meantime, these random things are happening because that's what happens when you're in a rock band. So I wanted to give people in a game space, but a modern board game space, the kind of fun factor from the games that we loved when we were kids, but let them get a chance to feel what it's like to become a rock star and see if they can do it better than anybody else that they're playing against. So game plays between 2 and 5 people, and it takes anywhere from, once you know how to play, between 45 minutes and an hour and a half. And you're just building up your career and trying to get yourself to a stadium. And your day in the game world is broken down into your day things when you're basically taking care of business, you're hiring crew, doing interviews, getting your record deal, nighttime when you're mostly playing gigs, and after hours when you're hanging out and meeting people who can help your career and having a good time and getting known around town. And so that's kind of the breakdown of the game. And it's fun
Wow.
if you play your cards right. You have some bonuses that anybody in the game can. You're all competing toward them and trying to do them first or best. And then you have some private goals that are personal to you that only you can accomplish. And you've got a manager that you have to pay and who is doing something for you as the game goes along. And it's a pretty good little analog representation of what it's like to try to become a rock star.
Sounds fascinating. I'm not much of a gamer, but I'm really interested now after the way you explained it. It sounds like a lot of fun.
I mean, forget, for people who are already hobby gamers, it will be a relatively light game. For people who haven't played games since they were kids, it's going to seem really complex at first, but it's laid out with the incorporating the theme really logically. So after you play a few rounds, everybody goes, "Oh, I got it now." And
And
it's become second nature.
Hard Rock 1970 or Hard Rock 77, was that like immediately the title that you came up with from your
Um,
history?
No, it started as a joke. Let's from because I was trying to make things sound like originally it was a competition organized by a local magazine, and I'm like, well, what would be the name of a magazine? And it was kind of a play off of Rock Scene and Rolling Stone, and so it was like rock instead of stone, and It's like, well, what kind of rock? Okay, hard rock. Well, let's rock hard. And, was never supposed to be the final title of the game. But by the time, the problem is I started designing it in 2019. And when I finally had a prototype ready and to take out and start play testing, we went into self-isolation of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And, that took a year out of the game's process. And so I started working social media to create awareness of myself and the game within the game industry, which I did pretty damn successfully. But at that point, then people knew the game as rock hard. And so it just stuck. And then everybody kind of, loved the title because it was cheesy and a double entendre. And um, I ended up going with a very well-respected publisher called Devir, Devir. They're based out of Spain. English is like a third language for everybody there, and they usually don't do games that rely on language. But once they decided they were going to do this game, they kind of went all in on the language factor, and then they went, well, we want flavor text on all the cards. And flavor text just means it's little text that puts things into context, but isn't
Hmm.
necessary for the actual gameplay. And they came back one night and they said, yeah, we want flavor text on everything. And oh, by the way, our drop dead date is next week. So I had to turn around. I think I wrote 85 cards in one night. And after a while, the editing software just stops working. And it's kind of like, okay, the line's here. I'm going to go right up to it. So there's a lot of fun stuff in the game. And at the beginning, that kind of is entertaining, but it sort of helps you learn the game and keep in mind what can happen. And as you play over and over, what seems to be very like some random things that can happen, you actually start to know the cards, and then you kind of can strategize around what might happen and be a little better prepared, which I think is very much like being on the life of a rock star on tour, where it's like, okay, you've broken this hi-hat cymbal in the middle of nowhere USA. Where do you go to get a replacement? How do you work around this broken cymbal? And after a while, when you know, oh, cymbals can break in the middle of nowhere, and we don't, you have your backup plan in place. What are we going to do if a cymbal breaks? And that just would be an example, because in this game, no cymbals were broken or harmed in the making of this game.
How could people get the game?
They can get the game either through Devir, Devir.com, or there is on the Devir.com site a list of local game stores that carry their products. You can also find the game online at a number of sellers. So the two reputable ones that I know offhand are Game Nerds, that's one word with a Z in nerds, and Miniature Market. Those are two places that carry the game. And so the easiest thing to do is just let your fingers do the playing and order it, and it'll be delivered to your house in like a week. And
Congratulations. It sounds really great. You've done really well, a law degree. Now you have a game and you seem like you have it all in perspective. So you've put everything in perspective, and I think that's fantastic.
you know
So
what? You get to a certain point in life, and you either sit back and you dwell on the bad things that happen to you, or you dwell on the good things, like cats and people out in the world that wish you well, and yeah, and just having some fun with your leisure time. I mean, that's the kind of the nice thing about hitting our age, right? Is that we no longer have that necessity to go make it big in our chosen field. It's not that we don't want to, but I mean, this is probably not what you set out to do in life. And being a board game designer is never what I set out to do in life. It's like, it's my, I think in my case, my fourth act. And it's like, I'm just going to have fun with this one.
we're still doing it. That's the most important thing,
Yeah.
right? We're doing it.
So people always ask me, I don't get along with the former members of my band, but it doesn't mean I don't wish them well. And then I'm proud of them. Look, they kept playing music in the face of, horrible sexism, and at a time when the band was considered a joke, and they stayed with it. And they dealt with their substance abuse problems, which is something that I don't have that brain chemistry. I know so many people that do and have fallen into the trap of not realizing that this switch was getting thrown in their brain and have had to deal with addictions from drugs to alcohol to sex addictions to working out addictions, different body dysmorphia
Yeah.
type things, shopping problems. Um, and I always just say, there but for the grace of God or, whatever nature, that could be me. So, I've had my own issues to deal with, and they're not that one. I try to have compassion for other people for what they're going through, and a little bit of self compassion as well, without dwelling in that horrible place. So, playing games lets me dwell in a happy place. Cats, this is the one that usually doesn't let me know. She's like, nope, you're not picking me up. Mm-mm. But even, I don't know what my cats went through the first 6 months of their life. So I deal with them with compassion and love.
This guy
And
came from the streets of Boston, but he's doing good. He survived. He's 4 years old now, so I got him when he was one from a
yeah,
shelter.
I got mine from an adoption agency. I think they had been rehomed. I think they'd been a little traumatized. So the one that was just sitting next to me is my friendly feral. She doesn't like to be picked up, but she kind of likes hanging out near me, which is nice. And the other one is on her little sofa on the top of the bookshelf on the other side of the room. And no, I'm not a teacher. I use this to map out games and occasionally remind myself of important things to do. But
Thank you. Thank you
yeah,
so much. I appreciate you taking all this time.
yeah, I appreciate your putting up with my low energy today. I did just get back from Gen Con, which is the largest tabletop gaming convention in the United States. They had at least 71,000 unique visitors this
Wow.
year. So that was a lot of people to be around. I got COVID for the first time in my life. It hit me quite heavily. It turned into pneumonia. It turned into eye infections, and it is hitting me particularly hard. And I know what I forgot to do. So hold on, you get to see this. Hi, Mom. I'm actually in the middle of recording a podcast. May I call you right back? Okay, I love you. Bye, Mom. This is one other thing that I will let you in case you decide you want to keep that in.
I do.
I think I am the last runaway that has a living parent.
Wow.
So I've been trying to get my mom to agree to sit down and talk about the band because she has all these memories, from an adult perspective that have been lost with everybody else. And it's, the memories are particularly painful for her as a parent because like a lot of people want to cast blame for things on our parents and say, where were the parents? Why weren't they looking out for you? My mom was young and she didn't know about this stuff either. I mean, you got to remember, this was all pre-internet,
Yeah.
like pre-cell phones, that
Pre everything.
pre everything. Like people don't understand, if you broke down on the freeway at night coming home from a club, we had those little blue phones stretched out along the highway at I think they were gaps of, I'm trying to remember if they were a mile apart or 2 miles apart, so that you never had to walk more than 1 mile or half a mile in either direction to
Oh,
get
I
to
forgot
one.
all about those. Wow.
Yeah, you had to walk along the side of the highway at night with, maybe not a lot of light until you got to one of these blue phones, which to their credit, they were usually working. And then you could call AAA or, whatever, and
Yeah.
somebody would come out and get you. But if you were a young woman, you didn't really want to be walking along the side of the road, especially if you were in heels and having people stop and like me, like, hey mama, you need a little help? I'd like to be like, no thanks, I'm fine. There's a famous story that's out there when Randy Rhodes from who was in Quiet Riot at the time, was a very good friend of mine. And he was driving me home one night and kind of, last minute was like, no, here's the exit. And he pulled across a couple of lanes of the highway rather quickly, got pulled over, failed a drunk driving test, was arrested, and they just left me as a 17-year-old girl at the side of the road to walk home at 3 in the morning. It's like
Wow.
it was such a different time. It was a time when, in high school, when I wanted to take shop, and they said to me, "Nope, you're a girl. You can't take shop." So the fact that we have come as far as we have in the last, 50 years of my life, I certainly had always hoped that I would live to see our first female president. The fact that we actually may have one this year, whatever your politics are, just the fact that we're in that position is something that is really meaningful to
I
every girl
agree.
who grew up, being told that there were things that we could not do in life. So I'm hoping this at least lets people know, yeah, you know what? Yeah, you can have that shot at being what you want to be. And certainly you can be a musician. You can be a very successful musician. You can go out and be a female musician and tell Spotify how they're going to do business, and that they're going to treat artists fairly.
I agree
So
with you 100%. I'd love to see. I think it's time to let the women take over. Definitely.
I don't know if we need to take over, but I think we need some equality for sure.
Thank you so
Anyway,
much, Jackie.
thank you, Steve. So I'm
Appreciate
sorry
it.
it's taken this long, and thank you to your audience for putting up with my low energy today. Please stay safe out there. Don't get this variant of COVID. It is I would say it's a bitch, but I don't like using, female negative words. So let's say it's a blank.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great afternoon or evening or whatever it is, wherever you are.